I love noise. Not noise in the sense of unwanted or unpleasant sound, but noise in the sense of a complexity of sound that explodes beyond the stability of a single harmonic structure. But looking over my modular system here, you may notice that I don't have any conventional noise sources in the system. Instead, I like to construct my own complex structures for noise. In this video, I'm going to share some simple recipes for how I make various noise structures with my modular system. But first, a quick dive into what noise is. For this video, I want to frame noise in terms of irregularity and complexity. The most simple, regular sound that we might imagine is a sine wave with steady frequency and amplitude. It is one frequency maintaining a singular intensity. Noise, on the other hand, is irregular and complex. There is an abundance of frequencies that are constantly changing in a way that defies description or mapping to regular structures. In practice, all of the sounds that we work with fall somewhere within these dimensions of regularity and complexity. A simplicity of frequencies develops into a harmony of frequencies, and then, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say a super harmony of frequencies. And along the dimension of regularity, a consistency of frequencies develops into a motion of frequencies and then a supermotion of frequencies. As I see it, noise occupies the outer regions across these two dimensions of complexity and irregularity. You may already be familiar with terms like white noise, pink noise, violet noise, and so on for describing the varieties of noise that you can find and work with. But I would like to suggest a much broader space of noise instead, in which a million different colors and textures of noise can be imagined. With this reimagining of the possibility space in terms of irregularity and complexity noted, let's make some noise. To get warmed up and thinking in noise, I want to start by quickly noting my zero cable noise patches here on my system. While I don't have any traditional noise generators, there are a few ways to get noise without using any patch cables to construct a noise source. When I'm choosing how to build noise sources on my system, I find that I often forget these simplest approaches, so I think it's important to note them at the start. First, the Interstellar radio has certain settings where it goes absolutely wild without any creative patching. I'll be revisiting this module again with some patch cables, but I want to observe some of the sounds that you can get simply in the Type 2 and Type 3 settings for this module. Second, jumping all the way across the case, there's ears, which is a combination preamp and contact microphone. Contact microphones are amazing for noise, and I often forget this. Depending on what you use to excite the contact surface, you can get a variety of noise textures, especially when combined with distortion from pushing the amount of amplification on ears. Here I have some crinkly packing paper as well, which I find works really well for this. It has enough internal structure to create interesting noise texture. Now, let's talk about some one-cable noise patches. These are still fairly specific to the modules that I have here, but I think they're all quite important to show for how transformative they are with regards to the modules being used. I think it's often worth experimenting with a module to figure out if it's capable of achieving noise in one connection. As I go through the different patches, I encourage you to listen for how different the results are. Note the variety of sonic characters in these irregular, complex sound forms, and take a moment to describe each one to yourself as you listen to it. The manual for the Interstellar radio describes this patch as a noise oscillator. By connecting the error out back to the signal in, you create a feedback loop that responds quite irregularly. I also want to note that this is not the only productive connection for noise with the interstellar radio. Connecting error out to carrier CV has its own character. Connecting signal out to signal in and listening to error out is also capable of its own unique results. The angle grinder is a combination filter and wave shaper, which means it's perfect for feedback patching into noise. After some experimenting, I've gotten the best results by patching the inverted bandpass output to the grind input and creating a particular relationship between three of the grind comparators here. Listen to how playful and dynamic that is. There are so many different noise characters that we can get from this thing, all by itself. With the couple switch engaged, the Sport Modulator 2 links the comparator of its two sections to the sample trigger of the top section and the input of the bottom section. By taking the output from the bottom section and running it into the frequency control of the top section, which we're setting to cycling here, the noise response is possible. Across all three of these patches, these ideas of complexity and irregularity are key to understanding what makes the patch successful for noise. You want to create a system whose output varies a complexity of frequency and intensity, using the features of that system that can result in irregular sequences of behavior over time. While the one cable patch for the Sport Modulator was great, I actually want to revisit it while it's right in front of me here to add a second patch cable. By patching the output of the top section to the frequency modulation of the bottom, we can cross modulate the two elements of the system. This is not so different from how we had it before, but I think the results are quite improved. The Nibbler, particularly when operating as a shift register, is incredibly useful for noise. However, most of that functionality is a little more involved than what I can do with just two patch cables, and it really sort of deserves its own video, so I think I'm going to avoid going into too much detail here. But I'd still like to demonstrate just a simple patch from the manual that's called Shift Register Noise. In order to get high-speed oscillators here, I'm going to be using the two oscillators on the Interstellar radio, but they are both just working as simple oscillators here, so there's no additional chaos coming from them. You can hear we can just get some nice high pitch, stable oscillators out of those two. So the clock and the shift are both receiving these high frequency, totally regular pulses. But the relationship between the clock pulse and the shifting of bits through the register is so complex that it does not present itself as something that we can call regular. Imagine a string of numbers that repeats itself only after a great number of digits. Even where a pattern exists, it may be impossible to perceive. In general, you can get quite complex irregular sound out of any two oscillators in a cross-modulation relationship. Here, I'm not using the couple switch, so the top and bottom sections of the Sport Modulator 2 are each just a standard oscillator. By patching the output of each oscillator to the frequency modulation input of the other, we create a chaotic cross modulation. The exact results are dependent upon the depths of the modulation and the exact behaviors of the oscillator as they reach modulation extremes, but this is a good portable recipe to have in just about any system. Another very portable recipe for noise that you may overlook is feedback between an oscillator and a filter. Here I have the top half of the Sport Modulator 2 running into the multifilter, and then the output of the multifilter running back to the frequency modulation of the oscillator. This patch can be embellished with all sorts of additional connections, but even in its most simple form, there's a lot of range and character to the sound. Here's a patch using the Koszalin frequency shifter to frequency modulate an oscillator in a feedback loop. So I'm going to take the oscillator, run it into the frequency shifter, and then I'm going to take the frequency shifter, run it back into the frequency modulation of the oscillator. In a way, this is a natural extension of the Oscillator-Filter feedback patch, extended to just another form of sound processing. I've decided to focus here on minimal noise patches for two reasons. First, I think that these constrained patches most clearly demonstrate the principles underlying the techniques at work here. These patches can all be embellished with additional cables, but the core idea of how noise is generated is on full display. Second, I think that by keeping these patches minimal, they best align with the modular principle of modular synthesis. These minimal patches are building blocks that can be composed alongside other modular concepts to create larger patches. They are more portable to other systems, and they leave open a variety of possibilities for customization and further embellishment. To close out this video, I want to make my case for why you might care about noise patching techniques like this. Personally, I think noise is beautiful in its many forms, simply as I've demonstrated it here. It's ineffable sound, that which exceeds the capabilities of language to describe or organize. Noise can be listened to, contemplated, encountered. One can feel beauty, lightness, and fragility in noise, as well as intensity, anger, and tragedy. It is music, and you can listen to it. But I understand that you may not feel the same way, or you may not share the same enthusiasm for it, in which case, you might think of noise as an ingredient in your sonic cooking. You may already use white noise, pink noise, or other store bought noise colors for your musical practice. You can think of the techniques that I've demonstrated here as a wider variety of available types of noise. Homemade noise, just the way you like it. And then you can take that noise and you can mix it into a texture or use a little noise to emphasize the articulation of a note. I think a little bit of noise can act like salt to enhance the natural flavor of whatever other sounds you're working with. In documenting these patches, I hope to teach or inspire folks with the possibilities that they contain. But I've also found it really useful as an exercise for myself and my personal understanding of the system that I'm working with. For anyone looking to deepen their understanding of their tools, I would definitely encourage you to undertake a similar documentary attitude towards your system and approach that documentation in terms of minimal patches as building blocks that you can record and work with. Thank you for joining me on this little noise adventure with the modular system. I hope that you continue to discover new possibilities in the tools that you use, whatever they are. And I hope you have a great day.